Hey there, teacher friends. It is Lee here from the Appalicious Teacher. Thank you so much for joining me for another Back to School Live. Tonight's topic is pretty exciting, and it is perfect if you teach grades 2nd through basically college, because I actually used this exact strategy just the other day for my college course. But I highly suggest it for 2nd through 5th if you're in the elementary realm or even up into middle school. Behind me, I'm a little off kilter because I had to turn my camera, but tonight we're going to be talking about SNOTS. And no, I am not talking about the kind of boogers that come out of your nose. I am talking about small notes on the side. And this is an annotating text strategy that you can use in your 2nd through 5th grade classroom to get your students making meaningful connections to their text, and to actually take ownership of their learning as they're going through an annotating text, right? So our dream as teachers is that our students will be reading a text, and it could be a story or a passage or even a test, and they take a moment and either underline or circle something to either refer back to or that they found important, or something, maybe even if they're reading a story, something they found funny. That's like our dream. But very, very few students actually do this naturally. We need to teach them. And I've seen some great ways that teachers have come up with. Just ignore the printer back there, guys. Oh, I just realized that's my old printer. Anyway, teachers have come up with some great ways to get students excited about annotating text. And I've seen emoji annotation or text coding where with a red marker, you're doing this, and a yellow marker, you're doing that. And the truth is those are great, but most of the problem is this. They are teacher focused, okay? Because the student has to remember what the teacher said each of these things mean, right? If the student is using the green color because the teacher said, anytime you find a date, you're going to color it green, they're not thinking, well, I'm highlighting this date. They're thinking, oh my God, I need to use the green marker because it's a date. My teacher said I needed to do that. So like I said, the problem with a lot of those types of text coding strategies is it's not really student focused, it's teacher focused. We're telling the student exactly how to code, exactly what to do. SNOTS, on the other hand, really takes the load off, the mental load off the teacher and puts it on the student. And so instead of you expecting to see the same types of annotations on every single text, you're going to see your students are actually engaging more and only pulling out information that they think is the most important, or maybe relates back to something that they've learned or read. And so this really kind of puts the focus back on the student and what they need to take away from this text, not what you're expecting them to do. So I know that a lot of teachers love the emoji ones where they're going to do a laughing face if it's a funny part, and that is good. But just remember, when you're using those types of strategies, you're becoming very yourself-focused instead of student-focused. We want our students to do things that are authentic to them, that make sense to them, because chances are if it's authentic to them, makes sense to them, originates from them, then they're going to keep doing it. So tonight, I'm going to be taking you through how to introduce SNOTS to your class, literally like a little mini lesson. You're going to sit here with me and we're going to just do a quick lesson on how to introduce this to your class that literally you can steal and do in your class tomorrow if you want. So first and foremost, we're going to introduce SNOTS to our students. Now, introducing this, when you say, hey, today we're going to be talking about an annotating text strategy, you're almost immediately going to get a snooze fest, right? Students are going to disengage from what you're learning because nothing sounds less exciting than saying we're going to learn how to annotate the text today. At least I can't think of anything more boring than that. So instead, we want to kind of bring this back to our students. I know as a student, just personally myself as a teacher student, I like to know that there is a reason why I'm learning something, because it's going to blank. It's going to better my blank. It's going to do this or that for me. Students are the same way. They don't want to be told, well, you just need to know this, so I'm going to teach it to you. They want to know there's some type of real world application out there for them. So I always like to introduce SNOTS to students using kind of this sort of line of thinking. You know, there's going to be times where you're going to be reading a text and you're going to come across a really funny quote, or a really sad part, or maybe a part that you just love. And you want to almost save that moment, like take a picture of it so you could go back and remember it. You know, but when you're reading a book, you can't really take a picture of the words, but you can annotate it. Okay. I also like to remind students that a lot of times that might happen on tests. We might see important information that we know could be a question. Or we might be reading a lot of information and we start to get overwhelmed with all the information that we're intaking as we're reading. This happens especially with nonfiction texts. If we're getting a lot of new vocabulary words, a lot of subheadings, and trying to understand the illustrations and the pictures, and this could become overwhelming. And so sometimes it's nice to boogie up the text to help us get through. So what do we mean by boogieing? No, we're not talking about the stuff that comes out of your nose, and we're not talking about dancing. Although let me tell you, teachers, if you start dancing in the middle of your class, your students will immediately be like, what, my teacher's dancing? This looks cool. Or at least they'll laugh, and laughter is always a good part of your classroom. But you could be like, no, I'm not talking about boogieing it down. You're talking about SNOTS, small notes on the side. Now, I feel like the title SNOTS is a little misleading because it makes it seem like all that students are doing are actually writing notes on the side of a text. But the truth is, that's not just what they're doing. They're going to be doing so much more than just writing notes to themselves. They're going to be engaging with the text as they go through. So once you've introduced what SNOTS is in a way that kind of puts it back onto them as to why we're doing this. We're not just doing this because the teacher said. We're doing this because there's times in our lives where we need this strategy. And here's how the tools I'm going to give you to do it, right? Then you're going to take them into a kind of a guided learning. So we know what SNOTS is now, but when are we going to like do SNOTS, and what are some things that need to be snotted? Okay, so we want to make sure we're guiding our students as to some of the key things that they can snot. And the truth is because this is a student-led annotating text marking strategy, there really isn't a wrong answer, but we want to make sure students are zeroing on the most important things. Because if a student at the end of your lesson comes back with an entire paper colored green, then you know maybe they missed the point. Yes, everything they read was important, but was it all that important? So we want to give them a little bit of structure to start with. So I would have out an anchor chart like this. I would put it up on the board and say, you know, let's fill in this anchor chart with things that we know are important to us as a reader when we read a text that we would want to make a note of. And so as students give you examples, you could write them on sticky notes and have them put them up on the anchor chart. If you have older students, you could give them a sticky note and say, what would you think would be the most important thing that you would want to annotate on a text? And then have them put it up and then talk about their answers. Whichever feels like the best for your classroom. I would say if you teach fifth grade, definitely more student-centered, having them come up with the answers. But if you're teaching like second or third, you might want to start the conversation a little bit and then have them kind of go in that direction. So of course, some important things that we're going to want students to annotate is the title. Always we want to annotate the title because the title is going to tell us what the text is about, right? Okay, another thing, any headings or subheadings. We are going to want to snot any dates because usually I tell my kids if there is a date in that text, chances are there's going to be a question about it. So highlight it because it's important. Another thing you might want to do is any details that relate back to a main idea, especially if it's relating back to a heading or a subheading. We're also going to want to annotate any like key vocabulary that we see. Like if there's something bolded or a word that we see over and over again, we're definitely going to want to annotate that. Also predictions. good readers naturally, and I always tell my students this, good readers naturally make prediction as they read. And it's so natural that a lot of us don't even like realize we're doing it. So I think one of my favorite parts, and when we get to the guided lesson, I'm going to show you how to kind of almost embed this in your students' practice. But we want to make a note of that prediction. So when we read the title, we want to think right away, what's this text going to be about? And we're making a prediction right there. So we want to write down our prediction. We like to have it right by the title. So we're definitely any predictions that we have. Pictures, illustrations are great to annotate and circle. We also want who the text is about to be annotated. So if it's a nonfiction text, who is the important people in the text? And if it's fiction, who are our characters? Also the author. We want to know that because chances are we're going to be doing something with this text, whether we're doing a responding to literature activity or we're doing a big writing piece and we're going to need to use the author's quotes. We want to make sure we're noting who the author is so that when we quote them later, we are spelling their name correctly. So definitely the author and the who. Okay, so guiding your students through what types of things could be annotated. What could be annotated, we want to stick them up on there and review again what are some of the things that we're going to SNOT. Now, I like to then have students make a little note for themselves in either a reading response journal or somewhere like a writing journal, somewhere where we can reference this with, if you have like a folder that you have, put it in there. This little mini, actually this anchor chart and this little mini anchor chart are both available in my SNOTS intro pack, which is linked here if you want to grab that. But I always like to have them kind of make notes as we're going through because we always want students to write it. You see it, you remember it, you write it, you remember it forever. So we want to have them write down what types of things they might SNOT. Now, their list might look a little different than what you have up there. They might have those and then more, and that's fine. Remember, we want students to own this strategy. We already have them hooked with the boogers. We want to keep them hooked by by empowering them to be in charge of what types of things they think are important to SNOT. So I always like to follow up this anchor chart with activity with having them make their own little anchor chart, mini anchor chart to keep for reference. Okay, so we've introduced the strategy to our students. We gave them the why we're doing this. We always want to lead with that, just in good general teaching. If you're not leading with the why, chances are your students are not as engaged. Okay, then we did a guided learning to understand what SNOTS is. We gave our students time to process SNOTS and come up with some of their own things that they think would be important to SNOT. Definitely take time to share what their answers are and guide the conversation to what's important in a text. So if like kids are just saying ending punctuation, that may not be the most important thing in a text. So you might want to guide them around to the more important things. Okay. After that, it's time for us to do a little bit of guided practice. So to implement this in your classroom, you will need a text to annotate. And that really could be I would suggest a shorter text, page and a half. That's high interest, highly engaging, but also is readable for your students. So make sure it's on their level, if not a little easier. We don't want our students to get messed up in the cognitive load of reading when we're trying to all teach them this new strategy. So if you are teaching 3rd grade, you might want to pull a text that's more for a 2nd grade level. Or if you're teaching 5th grade, maybe pulling a 4th grade level. We don't want our students to get caught up in the hard part of reading because they're reading difficult text, where all their brain power is being used just to read the text. We want the text to be easy so that they can process the information and use the most of their brain power to power the new strategy. So definitely make sure that you're mindful in the passages that you grab for your students to annotate. One of my favorite places to get that is News ELA. There's also a few other websites that you can check out. I think I'll come back and comment with some of those for you. I also have in the same pack that has the SNOTS and anchor chart, the lesson plans for you, and this little mini chart, I have a passage in there for you that is a sample passage for students to SNOT that is all about SNOT and what SNOT is. So it's actually a perfect passage to do with your students. The passage I'm sharing with you today is actually from the SNOTS passage pack, which is actually a collection of 8 passages that are written to be student-friendly, engaging, but are perfect for snotting. And so this is the first one in that pack, which you can grab. There's a link to that if you want to check that out. But here it is. It's Nose Hairs Save the Day, and it's all about why nose hairs are important. So we want every student to have a passage to SNOT. We also want a snotting tool. You can use a green pen. You could use a green marker, a highlighter. You could also use green colored pencil. That's normally what I would do in class, is a green colored pencil. Something green. We want it to be good and snotty looking, okay? So then we're going to start leading our students through how to actually start annotating text. And we're going to do this through a guided way. And we're going to guide our students through annotating the first part of the text. We're not going to go through and do the whole thing with them. Why? Because eventually we want to let them loose and allow them to practice this on their own. So first and foremost, we're going to say, all right, let's look at this. What is something important that we see right away that we need to SNOT? And they better say that title. Okay, we always want to pay attention and SNOT the title. So I would just circle it. I would model this, have this up on your document camera, show them how you're circling it, making sure they're circling it. And then we always want to follow up with a prediction. So if the title is Nose Hairs Save the Day, we're going to make a prediction as to what we think this text is going to be about, and we're going to write it. I think the text is going to be about how nose hairs are important. Nose hairs are important, and I tell my students there are no wrong predictions. So even if at the end you could realize that you were completely wrong, that's okay. You were thinking, and that's what we want. So have them write their prediction either up here, down here, wherever they can fit it, as to what the text is going to be about. Then we're going to start modeling how to go through and start annotating some of the key words in here. You know, one of the things as we're looking, we're going to see, it says like, have you ever seen the tiny hairs on the inside of your nose? And I'm going to highlight tiny hairs on the inside of your nose. Now we know specifically what types of nose hairs we're talking about. Notice I'm not highlighting the whole sentence. Our brain naturally tends to gravitate towards the most important part of a text. So even if you are a proficient reader, when you read, your eyes skim ahead. And although you might be reading all the words, your brain is focusing on the, so we're going to highlight that because we're going to focus in on those important words. We're not going to look at every word, only the most important. Okay. Here we can see the very last sentence says, nose hairs have a very important job and they perform it each day. And I'm going to highlight that because that's letting me know right away, uh-oh, nose hairs have a very important job. We want to make sure we know what we're doing there. Okay. I'm also going to lead my students into snotting that subtitle there. And then also circling or noting the illustration that the author included. And I remind students, anytime an author includes an illustration or a diagram or some type of text feature, it's important because they're wanting to show you information in a different way. And so I said, you always want to make sure that we're marking that. So I'm going to show them how to circle it. Here I see some bolded words. I'm going to highlight those, follicles and dents. I'm also going to highlight what they mean. It says the inside of your nose has almost as many hair follicles. And then it says in parentheses, the places hairs grow from. So I'm going to highlight that because that tells me what follicles mean. And then it's dense. It says it grows very close together. Now I know what dense means. Okay. So I'm going to start modeling. Then I'm going to kind of turn it over to them. And I'm going to say, I want you to now SNOT the next section. You know, maybe it could just be the next paragraph, depending on how younger students are. Maybe it's the next section. And I'm going to give them a chance to start snotting. I will give them a time limit, maybe 5-7 minutes, depending on how long it is. And then we're going to reconvene, and I'm going to have students share with me what they snotted and why. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that we're guiding our students through this process so that we're focusing on the most important information. And I'm going to remind them, if we're snotting everything, then we're not doing that. That's the one caveat that you can mess it up, is if you snot to like everything. So we just want to focus on the most important information in these things. Okay, now eventually our students will get to questions. I always like to have comprehension questions for students, because now students will realize, wait a minute, this is so much easier for me to complete because I snotted so much important information. Now I'm not having to go back through and try to remember where it talked about follicles. It's sticking out right in the front of the page. Or maybe I don't have to sit there and try to remember exactly what the main idea of the text was, because I highlighted it right here in this paragraph. Okay, so students will have an easier time doing comprehension. So I always like to pair this with comprehension questions, because students get the gratification of seeing how successful the strategy is when they're asked to do a task with the text. Okay, you could always too have your students just read the text to themselves first, then go through and snot it, whatever works for you. But always, I like, at least in those first few lessons that we're doing snots with, I like to have students tie it back to comprehension. And like I said, if you're looking for engaging passages that you can use with your students that gives you snotted examples, the SNOTS passage pack is down there. It's 8 different passages, highly engaging, all different fun topics, and with notes already there for you. Okay, so that'll become their independent practice. Obviously, take a moment after independent practice to review the answers, and then reconvene with your students about snotting, why it's important, and kind of drive home again that students, this is something that they can do anytime they're faced with a lot of text, overwhelming text, or even if they're reading a story and they just want to kind of remember a fun part or make a note of what the author says to come back to it, whatever that feels like for them. Okay, so that is literally a SNOTS lesson in a nutshell. You can take this and do this tomorrow with your students. I actually highly suggest teaching it to them earlier in the school year so that they can use it throughout the school year. You can make it as fun and easy as you like. I love getting green pencils, and then on Amazon, they actually have nose-shaped eraser tops that go on the, like literally it's a nose. And I like to make that their snot pencil, and they keep it in their pencil box. And so anytime that we're going to be annotating in text as we go through, I like them to pull that out and kind of, you know, use that, and that kind of ups the engagement a little bit. You can always do something fun like that. You can also remember to encourage your students to use SNOTS anytime they want, and get as fun and creative with this. So again, for joining me as we talked about annotating text using SNOTS. I know this is a strategy you and your students will love, and you will find that your students actually use even without you prompting. I promise, I'm not making that up, okay? I've used this in 2nd, 3rd, and 5th, and each time I've seen my students pull out their SNOT pencils or their SNOT markers and go to town on it. So it does work. All right, you guys have a great evening, and I will see you next week. Bye.